Hi everybody, I'm Andrea Bianchi, responsible for gas and power markets and allowances in Hera trading, and the scope of this presentation is the introduction to the European gas and power market through a brief history of market development to the actual market needs in a context oriented towards renewables power generation. EU has promoted and pushed gas and power liberalization since 1996, with the scope to create strong and reliable energy price signals, having them made on tap competitiveness, efficiency, player specialization, transparencies, and attract inward investment. Of course, criticalities emerged, being them security of supply, the need for a sounding policy making, and a strong market regulation and monitoring. What were the milestones of the liberalization, the so-called pillars? The breakup of monopolized supply, the third-party access to networks through network codes, the incentives to set realistic market prices, the privatization of formerly state-owned assets, and the creation of a competitive market as a result. The path to a competitive market brings to hub trading venues development through liquidity, maturities, number of players, and limiting the market share of each player participating into the market. The steps needed to build a functioning market have started with third-party access to networks granting an open landscape for everybody. In this environment, players started to trade, but just bilaterally and privately. To reach a certain degree of market transparency needed to attract further players, price discovery and disclosure needed to be. With that in mind, energy editors from Platts and ICES, for example, started to assess market prices and price dynamics and reported them in their publication. As market D rose, there was an increasing need for balancing rules, being them the physical settlement rules for open position, and of course the need for standardized contracts to minimize the cost of contract negotiation. At that point, a space was created for brokers, whose scope was to facilitate and push market deals, anonymizing counterparts involved, at least for the deal that have been made. With a regulated physical settlement, standardized contract, and a certain degree of anonymity, non-physical players, let's call them financial players, entered the market. The ground was ready then for full anonymity and credit risk management offered by the so-called future exchange. With all those instruments available, the forward curves had support to be developed, and a strong spot market supported the so-called hub indexation for long-term contracts that were indexed to oil at that point in time. A contracts overview reflects the history just being recalled. Some contracts, especially complex or long-term contracts, needed to be negotiated in every single details. They are direct, non-regulated, not standardized, and strictly bilateral. The majority of market contracts, though, are OTC, over-the-counter. So not regulated, but standardized and bilateral. They can be physical or paper, being incorporated under IFET or ISDA, respectively. A certain part of market contract, depending on players' need, are instead made through exchanges, and so we are regulated, standardized, and cleared. Let's go through to some very practical definition. The TSO or NO is the transport system operator or responsible for the physical balance within a network and to a certain extent to the security of supply of the network. An hub is a trading point within a network used for natural gas pricing and netback, and is usually physically located at the heart of the network where most of the physical flows are crossing. A VTP, or virtual trading point, is a non-physical hub where natural gas or power transactions are referred to. The balance price is the price at which every physical imbalance is settled. It's the ultimate underlying for physical market players, but it is also very volatile, being traded within day or continuously. The spot price, being the balancing price so volatile, the need for a short-term price to settle position in advance of balancing is required. That's what the spot price is for, and usually refers to day-ahead or two-day-ahead transaction. Most financial contracts have the spot price as underlying. An exchange is a trading venue where players can trade anonymously products delivered to a certain hub. The exchange operator is responsible for the trading platform where players show their interest and trade and nomination matching happens. When a settlement spot price is available with sufficient liquidity and trading becomes anonymous, financial derivatives become possible and desirable to boost liquidity, providing hedging for non-physical players through banks and financial institutions. But at this point in time, market monitoring becomes a must because there is going to be a lot of leverage into the system. The final step, an exchange that involves providing clearing services through margin calls and financial contracts, getting regulated and monitored becomes a future and derivatives exchange. We can see that on the left there are a lot of exchanges in Europe, each related to national networks, but just on future exchanges that we can see on the right. So far, we made no distinction between gas and power markets, but they have very different fundamentals. The power market has a local footprint, every country has its own mix of local production, and the commodity is not yet storable with very high volatility, and sales and production happen at the same time instantaneously. It is a very short-term oriented market, and this trend is growing. It's greatly impacted by renewables and distributed generation. It is usually indicated as a final destination market. It's the energy form most commonly used. While the gas market has a continental, global footprint, producers are scarce and localized, with a rising role for LNG. The commodity is storable and production can be easily modulated, so there is usually lower volatility. It is historically long-term oriented. With the rise of LNG, things are changing a little, and is in competition with other fossil fuels, nuke, and renewables for power generation. Usually, it is indicated as a transitional market, and while in some markets has a larger footprint due, for example, to heating. You can experience in the link that is showed in the slide that there are very large peculiarities in the production mix of every country in EU. Let's look at three extremes. Germany, that has a strong renewables production but is still relying on lignite. France, with a strong nuclear footprint, and Italy, which is very natural gas heavy. So fundamentals are sparse, which means diverging price. Price convergence has been an objective of EU since 1988, so far not good. Are renewables going to be the equalizer, the common denominator? Let's look at gas price convergence. We have seen power prices are still not converging. Gas prices in Europe are converging since 2013. The decreasing demand, the abundant supply, and the efficient cross-border capacity utilization made that. The rise of shale gas in the US and the increasing Asian demand pushed a lot of investment in LNG, making gas a global market with worldwide fundamentals. What about renewables? In the last 20 years, renewables have risen, but they have marginal cost of production of zero, and in the meantime we have faced three deep economical crises. So, which commodity took the hit and has been replaced by renewables? Let's look at the clean spark spread to answer this question. The clean spark spread represented the production margin cleaned from emission of a traditional power plant. The formula is rather simple. The price of electricity minus the cost of the fuel divided by the efficiency of the production process minus the cost of carbon emission multiplied by a factor representing the ton of CO2 per megawatt hour given the fuel used. The K factor varies from 0.4 of natural gas up to almost 1 for coal. Coming from the clean spark spread, let's look at the last part of the equation, looking at carbon price that varied a lot during the last 20 years, mainly because the market is driven by policy and politics. After the reform of the ETS scheme in 2013 and despite Brexit and COVID, the cost of carbon has risen over 30 euros per ton. So, a strong political drive and the recovery and resilient facilities that has between its priorities green investments. Given such a sharp rise in carbon emission cost, let's look as an example at Germany to declare winners and losers. It's easy to see that solid fossil fuels, coal in premise, took the hit from growing renewables and rising carbon price. This was, of course, somehow expected given the incentives, but this is just one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the increasing cost of the security of supply. Demand is seasonal, weather-driven, dependent from the economical cycle and prone to shocks. Wind and solar production is seasonal as well, strongly weather-driven, intermittent, and non-controllable. Renewables are not relieving demand stress to the grid, they are adding their own stress instead. As you can see on the left, from top to bottom, volatility is already increasing, going from the spot day-ahead markets to the intraday market with a scale of 2 or even 3 times. Renewables are coming on top of that, posing new challenges for the TSOs as well as for traders and quants. Let's look at this bold statement from Platts in 2016, which clearly explains what was already happening. The baseload business model, the one that made power plants owners securing positive significant clean spark spread by futures in the market, was already dead in 2016. Renewables killed it with their zero marginal costs, but a new business model emerged, offering balancing services to the TSO to counter renewable side effects. This changed the landscape. The value of power plants didn't reside anymore in their efficiency, but in their flexibility in terms of production modulation and balance response. Let's take a look at what just happened in Italy in 2020, for example. The blue line is Italy's spot price, the so-called pool. The red line is the price to settle unbalanced short position, and the green one is the price to settle long positions. We can observe an extra cost of almost €100 to balance short position versus the spot price and a discount of 30 or 40 in evaluating long position. For a power plant offering balancing services, those may be revenues as well. And this has been with a minimum price of zero. Some markets have already experienced negative price imbalancing and spot markets as well. What can we say so far? That the goals are set. EU targets for carbon emissions are tightening. Policymaking is supporting the visions with the ETS scheme plus the Recovery and Resilience Fund. But we should reach sustainability of the system. What are the evidences? The cost for the security of supply has dramatically increased because renewables are intermittent. The intrinsic cost generated by renewables is now mostly subsidized. Which is the challenge? How we can increase the renewables generation without compromising the security of supply and with sustainable cost, but related to balancing price and balancing price volatility. Let's start the so-called quest for flexibility with one strategy explored by the TSO in this quest to minimize balancing costs has been the introduction of the so-called capacity market. TSO were looking to buy call or put option from the operators to contain the marginal cost of balancing with the payment of a fixed annual premium. This strategy is the exemplification of the new business model for power producers. The fixed premium can encourage investments in flexible assets rather than in pure production efficiency. Those are hydro-pumped storage plants. Hydro-pumping stations have been around for a very long time now. During peak hours, they can produce energy, while in off-peak hours, they can work as pump, storing, if you like, energy in the form of potential energy in the reservoir. They can be coupled with renewable production to create a complex plant with a combined output or managed as a portfolio independent sources. In any case, the optimization process consists in the continuous optimization of a complex book of options. Cross-border capacity are the interconnections between national grids. To promote price convergence and to maximize the value of every country on flexibility, their use should be maximized. The payoff of these capacities resemble the one of a call option on the price spread between the connected countries. Given that the capacity is fully reversible, combined strategies are feasible, such as the so-called long strangle, which is a strategy that benefits the most of highly volatile prices indifferently from the price trend direction. The CCGT plant in the balancing market has the payoff of a book option as well. If the power plants want to be able to respond to upward call and downward call in a single hourly production, it should be set to a middle production point that can imply even a negative CSS. This negative CSS can be seen as the premium to a long strand or strategy option against the balancing price. The value of this production flexibility is maximum in the most volatile market, which is, of course, the balancing market. Another flexible asset, but in the gas world, is the gas storage. The gas storage are abundant and different in nature, being them from depleted reservoir, artificial, or even temporary. They can be seasonal or fast cycle up to a degree of flexibility. Gas storages are abundant. Is it possible to use them to balance renewable production? And the answer is they may be. One idea could be the gas to power plants. That can be They can be managed, connected to a renewable production site, or even to the power grid itself. Through electrolysis, we can produce hydrogen that can be methanate and transformed into natural gas with an efficiency up to 70%. If the marginal cost of production is zero for renewables, but balancing price are negative, it may be actually make sense. It can also decarbonize if the CO2 involved comes from carbon capture. The average marginal cost for the operation may be negative, but intrinsic value is positive. It all depends by balancing price volatility. We are done with the presentation. I hope that it has been interesting for all of you. And I take the chance to say goodbye and see you soon. Bye bye.